Hey, what's going on, YouTube? I'm back with another video. It is the off-season episode number 6. And today I got my guy Cal joining me. We're going to be talking about interracial relationships, race, and just our experience with being Black. And so without further ado, let's get into this thing. Y'all, welcome to the channel, my man Cal. What's going on, Cal?
Hey, what up?
Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me today, man. I'm super excited to have you on. And we're going to get into a very deep, tough conversation talking about interracial marriage. Mm-hmm. You are a person that I got a lot of respect for. I'm very fond of I told you before, right? Like that, you're like the ghost of the office. Right. So when I call him Ghost, for anybody who's watching this, it's because he's like a silent, like assassin. Not in the bad way he be killing folks, but just the way that he can just switch into like, okay, it's time to work and like demand the room. Like it's a thing that I don't have, and so I'm like really envious and jealous that he has that talent and I don't. But I love this brother right here, man. So this is Kiel Russel, slam director for Central, Jesus lover, son of God, Christian. Anything else that I'm missing, he'll be able to fill it in. But this is my guy, man, my boy, and we're gonna talk about some interracial relationships, marriages today, man. So how you doing? How you holding up?
Doing all right, man. Doing all right. I feel like I'm excited. I've been thinking about this topic for a long time, like for a lot of my life, the ways that it's been impacting me. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it, man.
Yeah. So, I mean, race, obviously, it plays a big role through our whole life. Just as Black men, like for me, I feel like I'm a what's the word? Anomaly.
Yep.
Because of how I grew up. I grew up in it was mixed, but it was mainly predominantly Hispanic. So I grew up around a lot of Hispanic cultures, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, some Cubans, Italians. I grew up my best friend was Puerto Rican and Italian when I was growing up. And so his family, they loved me. I was always at his house. His dad and his mom, they bought me Christmas gifts, spending nights, the whole thing. So I've been around. Even right now, my best friend of almost 20 years is Puerto Rican. So I have a very diverse upbringing. Right. And so, man, I want you to share your upbringing, man, childhood. What was that like? Where you from? And just some of your experiences.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I mentioned race, big part of my experiences. I'm actually going to start more on the faith side of stuff. So even before I was born, when I was in my mom's womb, she ended up developing a tumor, and she went to the doctor. She didn't know it was a tumor right away. She just wasn't feeling great during the first start of her pregnancy. So she goes to the doctor, and they're like, all right, you got a tumor. You also got a baby in the womb. Let me tell you how it's going to go down. Most likely, either you or he is not going to make it. Second option is both of you won't make it. And then least likely is that you're both going to survive and be fine. Like you'll both come out healthy, ready to go. So my doctor was like, yeah, you should really consider abortion. And so my mom, she church woman, grew up, she became a Christian later on in her life, but like stereotypical church mom, that picture that you have, that's my mama. And she's like, nah, I'm gonna get the church folk together and we're gonna pray. And so she prayed with a bunch of people for like weeks on end. I was like, no, I'm gonna go through with this pregnancy. I'm gonna trust that God's gonna bring him into the world and that I'm gonna be good too. And so
was this, sorry to cut you off, was this in the early part of the pregnancy, or this was like later on when she found out?
Yeah, so she found out kind of between trimester 1 and 2, kind of in that window.
Okay.
But then a lot of the prayer happened during that second trimester time.
Got you.
And so I was born early, but even before I was born, just a bunch of different other complications. And so the doctor's like, all right, we're going to do a C-section and we're going to get him out. And praise God, like here I am, I'm here, I'm healthy. I haven't had any issues. My mom, she felt, I mean, pregnancy, so, she wasn't feeling great afterwards, but she's been in full health. And it's been a joy just to have her as my mom and just see, even from early on, her faith and the way that that's kind of played into my life. So I was born in just outside of Seattle, Washington. And for a lot of my early childhood years, I went to a predominantly white school and predominantly Black church. And in both places, whether I was at church with my Black friends or at school with my white friends, people told me I was too white. I didn't fit
Mm.
whatever that mold was that they had of what a Black person is supposed to be. So I go into high school. Oh, sorry, real quick. My elementary, middle school was also a Christian school. I go to high
Okay.
school, public school experience for the first time. My public school is 90% white. I come in wide-eyed, like, what is this thing? Like, I don't know what public school is. What am I doing here? And a lot of my friends were kind of deciding their own faith, like, were they going to follow the Lord? I decided pretty early on my freshman year, even though, like, I said the prayer, became a Christian, whatever, in kindergarten. It really was in high school that I decided, all right, I'm actually going to follow the Lord for myself. Um,
Mm.
but it was also high school where I really challenged or felt challenged with who am I? Like, am I a Black man? Am I Black enough? The voices of people around me got louder of, hey, you're not Black enough. I liked school. One of my favorite subjects is math. I really like English. I wanted to go to a good school for college. Like all of this stuff that in my mind, people were telling me wasn't good enough to be Black. And so a lot of how I lived my high school life changed from freshman to senior year. So freshman year came in, was excited about school. By senior year graduation, still excited about school, but was slurring my words a little bit more, was trying to sound more hood, sound more cool, because that's what they told me it was to be Black. My picture
Yeah.
of what it meant to be Black was my mom, my dad, who both successful, both great. Neither one finished college, but both of them, like, if you talk to them, you would never know because they carry themselves
Right.
with honor, with esteem, and they are really smart people. And so, my picture of what it meant to be Black was, hey, my parents got it together, I got it together, I'm cool. I go to my
Yeah.
friends, for a lot of them, not all of them, but for a lot of them, their picture of what it meant to be Black was based on what media was saying. Rappers, singers, athletes, people that they're watching on TV that are like, oh, they look like this. That's kind of my context for what it means to be Black. Therefore, you got to fit into that to be Black. And so that's what
Right.
they're telling
So
me. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I had a question. So when you were in, you know, grade school, when you transitioned to public school, was they making fun of you or made you feel like you weren't Black enough? It was because of how you spoke, because you speak proper, like you're very well spoken. Is that was one of the things, or was it because you dressed a certain way? What was that the reasoning behind that?
Yeah. It was mainly how I spoke.
Okay.
And probably my freshman year too was a little bit of how I dressed. I found not too long ago, I found a picture of me from junior high, or I'm sorry, from junior year in high school, where I had this big baggy jersey on, had a backwards hat, like was fitting into all of that. And this was the early 2000s where that was in style. But yeah, early on it was how I talked. And even up through senior year, it was, hey Kyle, you don't sound like some of these other guys that I've been listening to or that I look at. And so I really struggled with, am I Black? Am I Black enough? But then in the first place, am I Black? So I move on to college and I ended up, you mentioned that you were kind of a part of a few different ethnic groups growing up. My church was predominantly Black. My school for most of my life, predominantly white. My Christian fellowship that I was a part of in college was primarily Asian,
Mm.
Chinese and Taiwanese. And for me, I was like, hey, I love like learning about different races, different cultures. I hadn't really been around a lot of Asian people. They're serving God. They're singing songs that I like. I like the people that are here. I'm gonna chop it up with
Right.
them and kind of build relationship with them. And so, ended up in university for my college years and graduated college not really knowing what I was going to do. Still kind of struggling with, all right, what does it mean to be Black? Do I have to step into a field that's quote unquote Black? What does that mean? Um, and the Lord is really leading me to ministry pretty early on after I graduated.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. it's so funny when you talk about, you know, people making fun of you and making you feel like you're not black enough, because my wife she's very well spoken.
Mm,
Like she still gets on me because I don't always pronounce words the
mhm.
best way. Like even now, like when I'm preparing for these interviews and these episodes, I'm like practicing pronouncing certain words that I
Mm.
struggle with. But like I've never said that before. And remember when we were practicing and rehearsing for the gala, I was like, yo, I don't speak like this. These words are gonna sound forced when I say them. I need to change this and make this my own. And so I've never been the one. My wife, she read encyclopedias when she was growing up. So, but she's very well spoken, and her vocabulary is like levels above mine, and she knows the definitions to words and stuff like that. So, but she's a black woman, and
Mhm.
she's like, I mean, she grew up in the city, but she was kind of a little sheltered.
Mm.
Don't let her hear me say that right now. But she's not hood. Like she didn't grow up in the hood. She didn't grow up in those type of environments. So I I think it's a difference though between like when a woman is very punctual and well spoken than when it's a man. Women, I don't think women get that, and I would definitely love to talk to my wife a little bit more about that and ask her, because I don't think I've ever asked her have
Okay.
she's ever been picked. I know people have made comments like, "Oh, you sound like you from the suburbs" and stuff like that, but she's never like felt like I'm not black because of I talk proper. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
So
Yeah, I feel like even
interesting.
obviously, I don't know the full perspective, but even I think about Barack and Michelle Obama. Like you look at how both of them talk, you look at the ways that they led the country. Barack, for some people, said, "Oh, he's not black enough. Like he doesn't fit. Like his name doesn't fit, his background doesn't fit, how he talks doesn't fit. He's not black enough."
Yeah,
Some people were saying to Michelle, "Man, she is so smart. Like she is cultured. Like she is relevant. Like she knows her stuff." And yeah, like I wonder, is it because of that gender difference between Barack and Michelle? Like they both had the same high level education. They're both leading this country, but one of them is looked at as not black enough. The other one's looked at as like, oh, you're so smart, you're so intelligent, you got it put together. That's a really interesting question.
yeah, yeah. You know what? And I want to, I want to hear more of your story and testimony. But really quick, I want to kind of jump the gun, and I want to talk about that. I want to talk about just what is black, right?
Mm,
Like we hear that so much, black culture, black this, black that. It's like, but what makes something black? And I know
mm,
for me, like I struggle with this like growing up, because a lot of people that I dealt with, they were like from the hood, and so when you come, I used to have like a Hispanic cadence to
mm,
how I talk. So when I went from Logan Square to Austin, which is predominantly black at the time when I moved over there, like people were like, "Where you from? Like you don't sound like you from Chicago, and why you saying these type of words and that type of words, and you're saying them a certain way." And then my hair was like very, very wavy. I'm bald now, but back in my prime, I had the ocean, the 360s.
hey,
You know what I'm
yep,
saying?
yep,
And
same.
so I had the real soft wavy hair, and people was like, "Where you from?" And I would tell them where I'm from, and I got picked on too. Like this was when rubber bands was popping. Put the rubber bands on the
Mhm,
bottom of your pants, and
yep.
that was at the time. I guess it was more of a Hispanic thing, which I didn't know. But I got made fun of for that, even though I was wearing like Shine John and Rocker wear and all those things. But because I wore rubber bands on the bottom of my pants, which and where I was from, that was like the thing to do. And his Puerto Ricans is like the closest thing to black. It was like I'm cool. So but yeah, man, it's like it always made me think like, well, what is black? And as I started to become an adult, I've always wondered like, well, what is black? And then I started to read, and I started to educate myself and just view the world through a different lens. And before I share mine, I want you to share yours. Like, did you struggle with that? Did you ever research that? What is your perspective on that? Like, what is black to you? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean that's a really big question, and actually the next part, believe it or not, the next part of my story kind of ties into some of my thoughts on what it is to be black. But before I get into
Okay,
that,
okay.
I mentioned I grew up in Seattle. I went to school in North Carolina, kind of in the South. Moved to San Francisco for a few years. Now live in Chicago, and in all those places, you have black people. And in all those places, Black people are different.
Hold up. So you got Seattle, you got North Carolina, and now you got Chicago.
And San Francisco.
And San Francisco.
Mhm.
So you were amongst a whole mixing pot over there.
All over the place, right? And getting Black people from Seattle, even Seattle to San Francisco, even though they're both on the West Coast, different breed. Seattle to North Carolina, different. Seattle, North Carolina, San Francisco, Chicago, different. And so you got people that look like me that if you stick them in a different city, it's like, wait, are you Black? Like, where are you from? Kind of like what you're talking about, Joey. Like, are you sure you're from here? Like, you ain't do stuff like we do it. So kind of jumping into my story a little bit. So after college happened, I jumped into ministry. I was on staff with Intervarsity Christian Fellowship, and it was the first summer of training. And we did a training on race and culture. And it was a great training. I don't remember a lot of it. I just remember sitting in it thinking like, oh, this is good. Like, this is really kind of helping me to think through, like, what is my position on race? What is my position on how God views race and culture? Was that created by God? Was it not created by God? Was it redeemed by God? Stuff like that. But the one thing I do remember about that training, the last thing he had us do after he kind of led the training, gave a few pointers, was he asked us a question. He said, all right, I'm going to have you guys get into different groups based on your race. But I don't want you to go into the race that looks like you. I want you to go into the race that you feel like is most who you are. That might be the race that you like, or it might be different. I want you to feel the freedom to go into the race that you feel like represents who you are. And so there were a room of, I don't know, maybe 75, 80 people. We had maybe closer to 100, honestly. We had white people, we had Black people, we had Asians, we had Latinos, we had multiracial people. And so we had like 5, 6 different groups. 90% of people went with the group that matched kind of what you would think based on how you see them. I ended up joining the biracial, multiracial group because I felt like I looked Black. And so people treated me as though I was Black. But also at the same time, I felt white and felt like people treated me like I was white based on how I talked or what I did or didn't do growing up. And so I was in the multiracial group with people who like ethnically were multiracial. And so we had that conversation of, all right, Kyle, why did you choose to be in this group? Kind of what's been your experience? So we chopped it up for a bit. And when we all came back together and the teacher led us through the final part of the training, he said, and I'll never forget this, he said, you know, for some of us, and this was my story too, I didn't go to that group. When I was first asked this question, I didn't go to the group that looked like me. But what I learned was my perspective of what it meant to be Black was so limited. I let my perspective of what it meant to be Black be defined by people rather than be defined by the Lord. And it was at that moment that I realized, oh, my understanding of what it means to be Black was so narrow because I only listened to the voices that were telling me I wasn't Black enough. I didn't take a step back, look at how God had made me, the skin color he had given me. Going back to your question of like, what is it to be Black? I feel like for me, a lot of it goes down to shared experiences. Because across the board, whether you live in one part of the country or another part of the country, people are going to look different, people are going to act different. But there's some things that a lot of us experience regardless of where we live. Things that we're told, names that we're given, experiences that we have, maybe even some weight that we feel from our past. Like there are times, I can't even explain it, but there are times where someone will say a certain word or someone will bring up a certain topic and like my whole body just cringes. I'm like, what? Why do I feel that way? Like, this doesn't make sense. It's not like something that's me before, but first time someone is saying this word or saying this phrase or bringing up this idea or opinion, I'm like, oh, I had an actual response to that. Like, where did that come from? So I think a lot of it is shared experience, but I think a lot of it too is just looking at how culture and how we as Black people are defined, depending on who you ask, there are going to be a lot of similarities. There are going to be similarities with maybe the, like I mentioned, the experiences we had. I think even the ways that we might look at culture and might look at American culture, some of the values we might hold, some of the things we might hope for, some of the disadvantages that we feel or feel like people that look like us feel. So for me, I think most basic breakdown for me is shared experiences in the ways that we might view or look at certain perspectives, even though we might dress different, we might have differences of music we like, we might have differences of sports that we do or don't like. But a lot of those shared internal feelings, experiences that we have, hard to explain, but I feel like I've seen that more than I've seen a lot of the other stuff across the board.
Yeah, it's so funny you talk about shared experiences. And so I've had multiple people that were close friends of mine, mainly Puerto Rican, always call me, I'm an honorary Puerto Rican dude. Because well, for one, as a child growing up, I've always felt comfortable in Puerto Rican circles. Always. More than Mexican, because a lot of my friends were Puerto Rican. And then their culture is a little bit more, I guess we can call it black. They listen to hip hop, stuff like that. So they're a lot more welcoming of black people. I'll put it like that. And so I can remember at least about 5 occasions where people close to me, even now as an adult, even just this last year, I got called an honorary Puerto Rican. And it was like, I was talking to the guy, he goes to my church over the phone. We were talking over the phone for a long time, and we are talking about a whole bunch of things, neighborhood we were from. And he said, he was like, man, when I first, he's like, I knew my brother told me you were black, but when I thought, I was just like, he has to be like Puerto Rican or something. Talking about food, all these other things. And then he was just like, yeah, he said it. So he was the last person to say it. And that whole like shared experiences, when you start thinking about like, man, well, what is black? We talk about shared experiences. I started to think about that from a world view, like a world overall, global. And because there's a whole lot of people who have our exact same experience as when we talk about like racism and discrimination towards black people, but they don't look nothing like us.
Yeah, no, you're
They're
right.
a whole 5, 6 shades lighter than us. And so I started to adopt this mindset. It was uh nationality over race,
Mm.
because there's so many races. And when you start to read the Bible, God don't bring up race, right? He brings up the nationalities.
Yeah,
He talks about, nations, of people groups and stuff like that. And so I was just like, man, like God doesn't bring up race. Like, okay, so let's define like this black and white thing. I started to like read some history books, and I was like, man, this is like an American concept right here. This whole black and white thing.
mm,
The light and dark thing, I don't think it is an American thing, because there's like Puerto Ricans. The lighter Puerto Ricans get treated better than the darker ones. Like, I've
mm,
seen this played out right in front of my face with some people that I'm very close to. And so yeah, yeah, it's so it's I don't want to say it's weird, but it's so interesting of how deep this thing of race and nationalities go.
right. Because even like you were talking about, the Bible looks at nationality and that passage in Revelation that talks about every nation, tribe, tongue, like, and looking at even the history of the Israelites, different nations they would go up against, and it was the nations that were for or not for God. And how like the Israelite people, yes, they are a group, they're a culture, but they were also representative of a nation. And talking about
Hmm.
how God looked at that nation favorably. Now they had their challenges, so there are definitely times that the Lord had to correct them. But
Yeah.
in general, compared to other nations that weren't following Him, like it was the nation that meant the most. And even like the beauty, and I'm gonna use the word chaos. The beauty and the chaos of a country, a nation like the United States is we have so many different races and ethnicities and cultures represented here. You look at the nation as a whole, but you look at Chicago, man, there's so many different types of people here. And one thing that I was kind of struck and challenged by recently was someone that was talking about the kind of the intersect of race and culture. I'm sorry, race and church or Christianity. And he was talking about how for some people there is a correlation there and they might not even realize it. So what he was saying is, as you look at race, whether you feel comfortable talking about race, whether you don't, whatever your view is on race, he was saying that for some, you might see someone that looks different than you, that has a different ethnicity than you, and your perspective might be one of two things. It's, all right, cool. I'm not racist. I don't necessarily want to interact with them, which is cool. Well, I'm not racist. There ain't nothing wrong. Or you might have the perspective of, oh, they're cool. Like they can do their thing as long as they stay over there. And he was talking about tying it into the church of how for some, that's the way that they look at the church. Like Christians are that group that like, yeah, I don't hate Christians. They can do their thing, whatever. It's not my thing, but they can do it. It's cool. Or yeah, just keep them over there. They're going to do their thing. As long as they don't interact with me, I'm good. And he kind of tied that back to looking at how when you look at God and him creating each and every single one of us in the different experiences we have, the different culture we had, he said, and this really challenged me, your love for God is only as deep as your love for people. And then he flipped it on his head too and said, your love for people is only as deep as your love for God. Because talking about how if we truly believe that we are made in God's image, that the best and the worst that we each have to offer is still something that the Lord has created, then you can't look at me based on my skin tone and say, I don't like you, I can't stand you, I'm not going to hang out with you. And in the same breath say, but I love God and I'm going to follow him, and whatever his law, his mandates are, I'm going to follow those. Because commandment number 1, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Number 2, love each other as yourself. You can't do one without the other. You got to have both. And race, the way that you look at race, the way that you look at people that are similar or different to you, can also reflect how you might view God and your love for him too. Mm. And that like, since hearing that, like that's been a word for me.
Man, you preaching now, boy. You preaching. So yeah, that was really good, man. I really appreciate you sharing that. You were about to get into your clef flow, but
a little bit clef flow without.
But I want you to give just a little details about your testimony. Like when you say you were saved, when you made the commitment when you were young. When you got to high school is when you really made that commitment. What pushed you to really make that commitment to follow Jesus, especially like in high school? What did you see or what did you experience that pushed you into that?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the church. My dad has been an elder in the church for most of my life. My mom's been involved in some capacity too. And so I think up until high school, this is what everyone else around me is doing. I'm in a Christian school. It's just what I see. High school, a lot of those same friends that I saw who were close to the Lord, were following him, started to fall away. And I just saw kind of some of the things that they were doing and even the change in the person that they were. And, it's not going to sound super spiritual, but like, I didn't want that. Like, I didn't want to be that person that suddenly was controlled by anger more than I used to be, or someone who's controlled by lust more than I used to be, or, any of those things to kind of take me down a road that I didn't want to go in. But more on the spiritual side, I think I realized that for me personally, I didn't see anything better with the way that the world was doing it. Now, that doesn't mean that, I didn't have my struggles, my challenges in high school, trying to figure out, right, who am I, especially in light of my walk with the Lord. But really that key for me of hanging on to God was I didn't want something else. There was nothing else that enticed me more. There was no other lifestyle that made me want to pursue that more than I wanted in my relationship with God. And then at the same time, so my freshman year, I mentioned, was kind of when I made that decision. But there was a guy who I knew as a freshman who didn't know the Lord, but he and I got along really well. We are the exact opposite, like in every way, shape, or form. You see me, you see who I am. He is a tall white dude that grew up on a farm, who loves like country, that loves ultimate frisbee, who like very extroverted, outgoing. Two completely different people. And I remember from afar, I saw him. I was like, all right, he might be the class clown type. Cool. I'll keep an eye on him. Maybe he's cool people's. I don't know. But then his sophomore year, he started going to church with a friend of mine from my middle school. And he became a Christian probably halfway into his sophomore year. And he and I just really started bonding because our circle started to be the same now because a lot of my friends who were still holding on to God from middle school had been hanging out with him. So I started hanging out with him and even just seeing his transformation from who he was pre-Christ to who he was post-Christ, like that was exciting for me. And like that was even another thing for me that was like, man, like look at how the Lord has been working on his life and changing his life. Man, I don't want to leave this thing. Like this is incredible. And so that guy actually, I asked him to be in my wedding. The same weekend I had my wedding, his sister had a wedding, so he wasn't able to be in my wedding. But like he and I have been in touch now for 20 years. He lives in North Carolina. Try to go out there at least once or twice every couple of years. I always chop it up with him. But yeah, man, he's cool peoples. He's real peoples, and he's one of the reasons why I feel like I really held on to the Lord was seeing God's transformation in his life. Because for me, I did a lot of my Christianity, my Christian walk early in life. I didn't really have that big transformative situation or experience that some have, but being able to see it in someone else that I knew personally, that was huge.
Nice. So you're and I mean you kind of shared a little bit of that, so I don't need to go back on that. But so you are now married, correct?
Yes, sir.
How long you been married for?
3 years. Just hit 3 years a couple weeks ago.
Oh, that's the year of completion right there, boy. Congratulations.
Appreciate it.
I mean, it's official. Ain't no turning back now.
Right? 3 years in, we got this.
Yeah, that's cool. So as a black man being married to a Caucasian woman, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of challenges have you had? And it just what's been your experience?
Yeah. It's been interesting because I've had my challenges, but I think I've heard more of my wife's challenges than I've seen my own. Reason being, I think for like a lot of my life, I was told certain words, called certain things, got the side eye, got all that. And so I think I've just been used to it. So I don't see it as much or notice it as much. But for my wife, like I mentioned before, I grew up predominantly white context for school. For my wife, like her church, her school, her everything was predominantly white culture. And then she ended up going to school at Moody, but even at Moody, a lot of people around her were white. And so she and I met. So I moved to Chicago about 8 years ago, and I was looking for a job and started doing door-to-door sales when I first moved here. And it was 100% salary. And so I basically had to make a sale or I'm sorry, 100%
Commission?
Commission, yeah. So all my money came from my sales. And first month and a half, hit a big sale, was riding high, was feeling good. And then the next month, 2 months, 3 months, nothing. So at that point, I was helping to lead a youth group at a church and was talking to the guy that I was leading with and just like, hey man, I don't know what I'm going to do with job stuff. I have this job now, but it's commission based. I don't have money. Do you know of anything going on? And he's like, oh, I work at Moody Bible Institute. There are a couple of positions that they have open on their website. Why don't you check it out? And then if you find something you like, use me as a reference. So that's what I did. Went on the website. I had wanted to do market research when I first moved here, and they had a position open as a data analyst, which for me was like, all right, it's close enough. I like numbers. I like doing research. Like this job seems close enough to what I want to do. So I applied, got it. And my wife, Liz, she was on the digital marketing team that I joined when I first started. So when I first started, though, like I was in a relationship. She had just come out of a hard relationship. And so we started as friends, but really it was just that. Like we didn't grow beyond just being friends. And then I had a breakup later on, and then she started healing from her past relationship. But still, for the longest time, like people started saying, hey, is there something going on between you guys? And we're like, no, like we're really good friends. And honestly, that was the case for about a year and a half. We were best friends. We would hang out all the time. We'd hang out with other people. Like we'd do stuff together. And it truly was just a good friendship.
Yeah, that's hard that's hard in today's world. If
right.
You can't just be friends, like if something's going on.
Right.
And I kind of have that too, where I'm just like, I don't think a man and a woman can have that type of relationship for too long
Yeah.
before there is a connection of like, I think we should be together. Right
Right.
there. Um, and so I'm gonna ask you this question and then we'll continue
Yeah.
because this is just something that I've always been curious about. Maybe I should do like an episode where I have a whole bunch of men on here and we could talk about this.
Yeah.
Um, do you or have you in the past tend to only hang with women that you had some type of attraction to?
Hmm. Um, that's a good question.
And it doesn't have to necessarily be like just sexual. It could just be like, I like her for some reason. Or she's cool in the way where like I will be cool with a guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like we connect in some type of, but there's some type of like chemistry there that because she's the opposite sex, it could lead to something.
Mm-hmm.
My theory is that I believe that that's how most men operate.
Mm.
Is that if a woman is just like really like, unless you grew up with her, but if you're not attracted to her, like in some type of capacity physically or even like emotionally or something, you're not really gonna be friends with her.
Mm-hmm.
You might be like acquaintances, but like I'm talking about like friends
Right.
in the context of like a real friendship. I don't see that happening. And if it does, it's gonna be like in your case where it leads to marriage.
Yeah. No,
This is my theory.
I think it's really hard. I think there are a very, very few cases where you can be a genuine best friend with someone of the opposite sex and have nothing go down. But I think 95, 98% of the time is not the case. For me, for really up until I got married, so most of my friends growing up were women. And a lot of that was I wasn't necessarily like the most social person. I was pretty shy as a kid, but I like I tend to listen pretty well. I've had people say that they enjoy talking to me. I like asking questions. And for whatever reason, in the context that I were in, that tended to attract more women than it did guys. Like I'd have my guys where we chop it up about certain things, but if someone needed a deep conversation, usually it was a woman coming to me being like, "Hey, I'm just going to spill my guts. I know you're going to listen, ask good questions." Um, some of those were also women that I was like attracted to, whether that was physically, emotionally, intellectually, whatever. But there were honestly some cases where I'm like, I just enjoy the fact that you think that I'm someone worth pursuing, like someone worth reaching out to, sharing thoughts with, asking questions about. I don't want this to go anywhere, but I appreciate that even if you don't want it to go somewhere romantically, I appreciate that you're still reaching out to me. So cool, I'm gonna eat this up. But like, I think as I got older, I actually had someone in college kind of call me out on that, saying, "Hey, you have a lot of friends that are women. Where's your guy community? Like, do you have accountability on the guy side? Do you have guys that you're pouring into, guys that are pouring into you?" And so that kind of started to shift a little bit after college of me being more intentional, hanging out with guys. But definitely was a choice, and it's definitely not my natural tendency. And to your point, some of that is just because there is that attraction piece, and it's sometimes fun or easy to hang out with someone that you think you're attracted to in whatever way, whether romantically or not.
Yeah. I was raised by my mom and my sister. My sister's 6 years older than me. So I was raised by two women and my sister had a lot of female friends. She had male friends too. But a lot of female friends. So I was around women a lot. So me as well, I was naturally I was always easier for me to connect with women. I would connect with guys through sports. Like I played
Yep.
basketball
Yep.
and all through grammar school, and then I ran track and I played ball and ran track in high school. But then, like, I didn't really get the opportunity to see what that looked like in high school because me and my wife met. We were sophomore. Well, we met when we were freshmen.
Mm.
But we didn't. We got together when we were sophomores, and pretty much every other woman relationship that I had that was close like that, where I would get the call or the text message, all those things stopped once I got with her.
Mm.
Um, so I never really seen what that looked like in a more mature setting.
Mm.
So, um, but yeah, I've always had hung around a lot more girls than I did men. It was usually too. It was just a lot of um, what do you call it? I dealt with a lot of somewhat like insecurities because I was short.
Mm.
But also a lot of girls liked me. I'm
Mm.
not like being cocky, but in grammar school and all those things, like it was a lot of like, you know how it was, like I like you, we go together, this and that. It was a lot of that. And
Right.
then I tend to like just hung out with all these girls.
Right.
And then dudes used to always too be jealous and they start calling you like, oh, you a sissy or you this, you that, because I'm like, but I'm hanging with girls. Like, what are you talking about? I think that you're probably more on the other side because you're hanging out with only dudes. Like you need to check yourself. So I would much rather be in a company of women than a whole bunch of men.
Right.
But
Right.
anyway, so but yeah, that was just always easier for me.
Yeah.
But
These
yeah,
are
that's how long did you guys date before you guys well, how long were you friends and then dating and then marriage? What's the
Yeah. So
timeline?
we were friends, like best friends, really good friends for about a year and a half, and then dated for a year and a half before we got engaged. So at that point, we'd known each other 3 years, and then our engagement was a full year. So we knew each other 4 years before we were like officially married. But even in that best friend phase, it was so interesting because there were guys that she liked that she would tell me about. There were girls that I liked that I would tell her about. There was even
Yeah.
one point where we were both dating other people while we were still friends. Nothing had happened between us yet, but we were dating other people and telling each other about it. And one part of my wife's story is that she started dating a guy and realized 2, 3 dates in, she's like, man, I don't I don't really know why I don't like him. Like he seems like my type. And like for most of my life, he's been my type, but I can't figure it out. And she was like, wait, I think it's because he's not Kyle. Like, I think I like Kyle. Meanwhile, for me, I had, so kind of going back to our story a little bit, I had asked her out first when we were friends, and she said no. And this was probably 6 months into our friendship. She said no. And so I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to move
What
on.
she really meant was not yet.
That's exactly what she said, too. She's like, I mean, I meant at that point, not yet. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna move on. And then a few months later, I start falling for her again. I'm like, man, not again. Like she said, no, I'm over this. And so I remember thinking, all right, next on Monday when we are at work together, I'm gonna ask her out again. But then that weekend we hung out. We ended up having like this big fight, and I was like, you know what? Forget her. I ain't gonna ask her out. And so I started dating other people. And that was at the same point that she started dating other guys. And so she had that realization. Meanwhile, I'm dating other people. And I'm like, you know what? Liz doesn't like me. Doesn't even matter. And
Were you like a little jealous? Like she over
I was a
there
little
dating other
jealous.
dudes and stuff. You a little jealous?
I was a little jealous,
Yeah.
especially because one of the guys was a guy that she had liked on and off for a couple of years. And she'd been telling me about him since I had known her. And so it's like, man, I don't stand a chance. Like this dude's been around for a minute. He's her type. Like I really do need to move on. But
Mm.
we ended up. It was right before Christmas break. Her family's from here. I'm from Seattle, so I was about to head home to Seattle. We didn't know each other for over a year. I had just gotten out of a dating relationship. She had dated a couple guys in the past few months. Was like, you know what? I'm not feeling it. I think I'm feeling Kyle. And we ended up having a conversation right before Christmas, before I was about to leave on my flight. And long story short, save the details, but basically, we realized in that conversation we both liked each other. And that's kind of when things started shifting for her from a race perspective. For me, like I had dated white women before. I also dated a black woman for a while, but I'd been used to interracial relationships. She had dated a guy of a different ethnicity. I forget what ethnicity he was. He might have been Latino. But they dated for a little bit of time. But I was her first black boyfriend and really kind of the first long-term interracial relationship that she had. And one of our first dates, I didn't even notice this. We were just walking on the sidewalk together, holding hands. We passed by a couple black girls, and they just completely side-eyed her, like stared her down, made her feel intimidated. I didn't notice it. I'm just walking around like, no big deal. What up? Hey, I got my new girlfriend. We're feeling good. And so after we walked by them, she's like, "Hey, did you see that?" I was like, "No, see what? What I missed?" She's like, "Did you say the way that they looked at me?" Like, "Nah, like, was it bad?" She's like, "Yeah, like this and this, blah blah blah." I'm like, "All right, well,
You
maybe."
were her first. You were her first black boyfriend.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm like, "All right, well, I believe you, but maybe that was just kind of a one time thing." But then the more that we started hanging out, going places, whether it was black women, white women, even like white guys, they'd look at her like, you gonna be with him? Like, why him?" I got some of those looks from black women too. I mean, I've gotten them for parts of my life where I was dating white women, but I got them even more, kind of the more serious that Liz and I got. But it was just one of those things where I don't think I fully realized how much of a not accepted thing it was for some people until I started noticing the looks myself. And
Mm.
even after we got married, um, we had situations with close friends and family where we had to figure out, what does that mean for us? Like when we have kids, they're going to be mixed. What is that going to look like? Like, how are we going to raise them? And just all these conversations about just because I'm black, she's white. Yeah, we have our own stuff that we're dealing with from other people. But if we have a kid, like, what's that going to be like for them, and how are we going to raise them? So yeah, it's been. I think the longer we've been married and kind of the more socially acceptable it's become, like the less we're getting those looks. And even like now on the flip side, we were in Galena, Illinois, a couple weeks ago, and we walk into the store. And Galena is a predominantly white city, small town, maybe a few hundred people that live there. We walk into this popcorn store. She walks in first, and then I walk in, a couple seconds behind her, and I immediately like they've got shelves and shelves of popcorn. So I'm not paying attention to anyone who else is in that room. But Liz walks in, I walk in, and then Liz noticed that the person behind the counter just got this huge grin on her face. And so Liz starts, looking around, figuring out what she's going to buy. She ends up buying her popcorn first, goes up to the counter, and the woman's like, "Hey, is that your husband?" Like, "Who?" "Oh, yeah, he is." She's like, "Man, oh, that's so cool." Like, and like she's getting excited. She's like, "Oh, that's so cool. Like, that's so great. You guys are great." Sometimes it's cool to hear from other people. Sometimes it's like, man, like, are you just saying that to make you feel good about yourself? But like, yeah, we've gone from the eyes, the side eye, the comments to, "Oh, that's so cool. Like, it's great to see you guys," stuff like that. So we've had a little bit of everything.
I've witnessed it and I've heard it multiple times, and it was never towards me. I've been with a black woman for 18 years of my life. I've never officially dated outside of my race. Um, but I've heard women like they didn't know them. Like we were literally, I forgot exactly where we were, but there's been many settings where me and my wife are out, and next thing you know, a black man with a white girl walks past. It's another group of women. They're like, "What's the problem? Black man couldn't find one enough sisters around," and it's like, "Yo, you don't even know if they're married or not. Like they're just walking. Like it's so rude and it's so disrespectful, and it's just like you don't know what kind of history they got. You know what
Right.
I'm saying? You don't know, and this is a question that we could talk about too is should people like look for that? Like, should I be like, man, you know what? I'm only gonna date in my race.
Mm,
Is that a
mm,
is that a healthy conversation to have? Like, well, obviously with yourself first, and then just like, man, like, but I like this girl. She's another race or she's another, nationality, and man, how people gonna take it? And you in a certain city, it could be very frowned upon. You know what I'm saying? Um, have you ever, uh, I mean, if this is too personal, you could tell me.
mm.
Yeah. You ever thought about like, maybe have you ever had an experience where it made you second guess being married?
Yeah, I haven't had that experience. I think what I did have kind of, especially earlier on, so maybe college, even post college for a few years, was trying to figure out, all right, what race of woman am I going to marry? And in college, there was this bet going around because I was a part of that Asian fellowship. There was a bet going around, friendly bet of people being like, oh, what ethnicity is Kyle's wife going to be? Like, is she going to be white? Is she going to be black? Is she going to be Asian? Is she going to be something else? And all these people had, I remember I was sitting at a table my senior year and I just had like six other people around me. And this whole conversation is going on around me about what race is Kyle's wife going to be. And I'm not saying a word. I'm like kind of entertained, honestly, like hearing their thoughts and why they think I'm gonna marry a certain race. But I think I did have that moment of being like, all right, like for me, what is it that's gonna make me say yes to marrying someone? Um, yeah, go ahead.
Have you had multiple uh like you've dated black, you've dated white, how many other races have you dated?
Yeah, so I've dated white, dated black, asked out an Asian woman who said no, and then apparently found out later on there was a different Asian woman who liked me, who I also liked, but didn't ask her out. So black and white, ultimately. And I dated a black woman for over 3 years. So I lived in California after I graduated college, excuse me, and was out there for 2 years and was dating a black woman long distance, who she was in grad school out here, which is how I ended up in Chicago. And so we dated long distance for 2 years, and then we were in the same city for a little over a year. And for a season, I thought, she might be the woman that I married. And the more that I kind of like thought about it, the more that we talked about our relationship, we just realized we were going on two different paths. And I think had we been going on the same path and kind of more aligned on some of our values, some of the things we wanted in a family, I probably would have
Mm.
married. So for me, it wasn't necessarily a conversation about like, should I or shouldn't I marry certain races? It was, this is someone that I'm attracted to, and we have a lot of things going in common that we like about each other. With her, obviously those things kind of fell apart, but with my wife, it's been great. And I think kind of going back to your original question, like, what are those things to think about? Like, is it okay? Is it not okay? Should it be something that people consider? For me, honestly, I go back to, this is going to sound like a really weird analogy, but I think about the church. So my personal view of race in the church is, and this view has kind of changed year over year. So you might ask me in 2 years and it might be different. But now, kind of where I'm at is, if your church reflects the neighborhood around you, then I'm cool with that. If your neighborhood around you is predominantly white and your church is predominantly white, cool. But anyone should feel welcome to come in. So it shouldn't feel like because it's a just white church, if I come in as a black guy and I'm looked at funny, if sermons from the pulpit have nothing to do with me or things that I care about or even social justice or stuff like that, then I think there is something to be talked about in that context, whether it's a white church, black church, Asian church, Latino church, whatever. But personally, I'm cool if a church reflects the neighborhood as long as there are also messages and a sense of hospitality to anyone in the area. And that's kind of how I feel about marriage and interracial relationships too. Oh yeah, and then flip side of that, like, and also like multi-ethnic churches, 100%. Like, heaven is going to be a whole bunch of people from a whole bunch of different backgrounds, different tribes, tongues, languages, like all praising the same God. And so you got a church that reflects that. Hey, praise God. In the same way,
Listen,
huh?
I love multicultural churches. You know why? Food.
You're right though.
Different flavors of food, bro. So you
Right.
got the black food, obviously. You get some, some. It's a debate on like seasoning amongst the Caucasian circles, but they be making some good stuff too, right? They be having like real fire baked goods and stuff like that.
Right.
And then you have like Latinos with their food, right? Puerto Rican food, Mexican food, right? Cuban stuff, like even like doing some Chinese food in there. Like,
Right.
so that's always my go-to. Like, it's a black church, like, man, I'm gonna miss this though. So for me, my church experience as an adult has always been multicultural. I've never been to just a predominantly black church or a predominantly white church. I've always been like in the middle. And so that's been like my church experience. When I was younger though, it was black churches, and it was, you know, 2 services a day, and then you get the food in between for 2 hours.
Right, right.
And but it was good. So for me, I want to go to multicultural church,
Yeah,
and food is a top priority in that decision making.
I mean, that
The
makes
fellowships gonna be lit.
makes a whole lot of sense. Yeah, I went to black church growing up, but I've been to predominantly white churches. I've been to multi-ethnic churches. I think like personally, my go-to, I would love to go to a multi-ethnic church. I felt like a few years ago, the Lord was challenging me to be in a position where maybe I looked different than other people and could speak into conversations about race. But that was just me. That was my conviction. I'm not saying that that's what's supposed to be the way for everyone else. And so going back to interracial relationships, I kind of feel the same way as I do about the church. Like, I think there should be people who marry within their race and who love each other and like, yeah, continue to build that culture, but don't alienate other people that don't look like you or
Right,
don't look
right,
down on
right.
people that are in that interracial relationship or in a
Having
different.
a It's okay to have a personal preference.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not against that. As long as your personal preference don't involve you looking down on other people.
100%. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like if your favorite food, going back to food because I'm hungry. If your favorite, favorite food is pizza or ribs or whatever, don't like criticize or look down on somebody else because theirs is not. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, we're all different. God made us all us different. That's the beauty of race, right?
Mhm.
The beauty of having these different cultures is because everybody can bring something to the table,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
A society that isolates themselves and stands alone eventually will die out
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
they're not gonna have everything that they need in that the community to sustain them. Eventually, they're gonna need to reach out to the next community to be like, "Hey, we got to make some trades happen."
Right.
Right? You're always gonna need another group of people. You're always gonna need another person. Um, it's just not gonna have everything, and so that's the beauty of different nations coming together and being able to celebrate each other and honor each other for being different, not looking down on them. And so I think that's amazing. My last question for you is: have you ever has do you struggle to like explain like cultural references, or is your wife like hip, like she knows?
um, it was definitely a struggle more so at the beginning. I think so. We got married fall of 2019. And I mean, race relation stuff has been going on in the country for a long, long time. But 2020, big year in terms of things that went on from a racial perspective. And so
Yeah.
she and I, like, she was huge in helping me feel loved, to feel like I was heard, to feel like, I'm hurting, I'm angry, like she was there. And so, like, in the moments where it's big stuff, 100%, I feel like she's got my back. She understands it. She understands it as much as she can, not being a black person, but is willing to learn. But some of the cultural references, TV shows I grew up with, clothing lines that I used to wear, different words, different phrases, stuff like that. And she's still learning. She's still learning.
He said she's still
But it's
so
been great because, huh?
what's the movies that you were like, you said something and she ain't referencing. It's like something that like it's still like we say a whole bunch of scenes from like Friday, right?
Yeah, yeah. I was just
And he was
about
like,
Friday talking about
"You ain't
Devo.
never seen
Yeah,
Friday?" Yeah, so it's like you had some of those moments where you're like, "Come on, we got to watch this movie."
yep. And some of the TV shows like she used to watch, I wouldn't say like I binged as much as I could as a 90s kid when Netflix, all this didn't exist. I binged Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I knew what time it came on every week. I had the TV on. No one was going to take that TV during Fresh Prince of Bel-Air time. So like I
Yeah,
watched that show religiously. Liz watched it a little bit growing up. So there were some references she got, but then there are other stuff that like just went right over her head. And so yeah, it's
that's
been
so
nice
funny.
having Netflix now and Hulu and other platforms where we can go back, watch shows together. Even like goofy shows, like she grew up on That's So Raven for a different reason than I grew up on That's So Raven. And so for us to both talk about that, like her being a girl and like talking about that perspective, me being black, talking about that perspective, it's just been real cool for both of us to add to each other's.
What's one of the white shows that you had to watch to understand like some of her references?
So she, oh man, probably the most recent one. Uh, well, okay, I'll say this. She grew up on How I Met Your Mother, and
Okay.
she has not asked me to join her in watching that. However, and not for any bad reasons, it's just like she knows that, that's her show, and she's like, it's cool if you don't like it. Like, I'm not gonna ask you to like it. But then some shows like New Girl is one that she's kind of pulled me into. Um, The Office has been one we talked about. Yeah, shows
Watch The
that.
Office, Cal. Cal, watch The Office. The Office is fire.
Right. And I was gonna say that's one of those shows like regardless of race, I've had plenty of people tell me I
Yeah.
need to watch that. But yeah, just stuff that she grew up with that she like. Even she grew up more on like shows from the '60s, the '70s. Dick Van Dyke, Steve Martin, Martin Short, people who 3 years ago, no idea who they are. Now I'm like, all right, I've heard of them. They've done some stuff. But yeah, so
Yeah. So personally, like I let you into, and anybody else who's gonna watch this video for that matter, into a little personal, like thing that I pick with my wife about, right? Because my wife, like I said, she grew up in Wicker Park of Chicago. Anybody know where Wicker Park is? That's right next to Humboldt Park, and she's not hood at all. She has family that are hood, but she didn't grow up in that type of environment. So, but when it comes to TV shows and movies, me and my wife have different experience. Even though she's black, she didn't watch a lot of the black movies.
mm,
So she's not a fan of them, but
mhm.
she watches like New Girl. She got me into The Office, right? She was a extreme Harry Potter fanatic, right? She read in all the book, the big old thick book. She read them all like multiple times.
Right.
And just it's so different. And God is so funny because this opposites attract. I would have never thought, and like just thinking about my childhood, like I had an image of what I thought my wife would be. Like if I would draw her out,
Mhm.
it it would be looked different than who my wife is now. Um,
So funny.
and it's so crazy. But yeah, my wife, she don't the thing that our favorite show to watch together is The Office, and it took me a little bit to warm up to it. But now it's one of my favorite shows. I still haven't gotten her to like binge Martin with me, which
Yeah.
that's on the docket. I'm like, girl, you got to binge watch Martin. Like she's just
Yeah.
not interested. Fresh Prince, she can tolerate, but
Okay.
like I'm from like the hood show, like the hood black show, like Martin. Um,
Is it a different world?
uh, I'm
You watch
missing
that?
one. A Different World. I knew about it. I used to watch it here and there, but I wasn't like a big fan of it. But I mean, any other black shows, I know the theme songs to them. Just put it like that. Like they were all rotation in the crib. My sister, my older sister, she would watch those shows. So I was kind of like forced to watch them or at least pay attention to them to a certain degree. They would be playing and I'm playing with my little toys or whatever. So, man, but it's just so funny, and I love how we can come together and just have a talk about race and nationalities and not be just so negative and not be just everybody's tense and on edge and you know, I love that we can talk about like our like black experience. Um, and because I think that there's one thing if we ever want to say like what is black, the one thing that we can say is I think that we all have in common, no matter where you're from, Seattle, Illinois, Florida, wherever, is that I think as black men, we all have a trigger
Mhm.
of because of the persecution that has happened
Yep.
and not knowing for sure like if we're ever going to experience that, if we're ever going to go through that. Like I never experienced police brutality before. Like I did once get dropped off in the wrong neighborhood because they thought that I would get beat up, but because I knew the lingo and how to maneuver, I was able to be okay. Um, but there's just this whole thing with like police and stuff like that. And It's not necessarily a trigger for me, but when I get pulled over, I'm just like ID, hands on the steering wheel. But I'm never scared. And one thing that my wife told me is she was like I'm not one of those like militant like black dudes, right? I'm not gonna be at the protests, not gonna be at the riots. Um, I just view race and I deal with race different. Um, I was never just like I'm black and I'm proud. And does that make me like not black? 'Cause I know a whole bunch of black people. I'm gonna be like, look, you weren't at the marches neither.
Right.
So you more blacker than me because you made a Facebook post. I just think like, man, if you really about it, then like be about it, right? Like if you're gonna talk about marching, like go to the marches and march. Like, go to the protests and protest. Don't just because now another person has died by the hands of police or some type of wrong injustice. Now you're saying something. But where are you at when in the peaceful times? Who are you building up? Who are you building relationships with? Because I think relationships go further, right, than legislation or you marching and protesting. Not saying that those things don't work, but if you really want somebody to understand the black experience, right, and black culture or what it means to be black and our experiences, I think those come in a form of relationships, right? I have an older white gentleman at my church that he don't live in the city, right? He lives like far out, and it's some things that he has to understand. The thing that I love about him is that he's willing to have those conversations and he's willing to be corrected in certain areas. And until we can get to that, where we have real conversation and real dialogue, we're always going to have this back and forth, this side versus this side, and city versus the suburbs, and all these things. And it's just like, bro, all these things start by relationship.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you truly love people, that's the only way that you're gonna get to relationship. So the
Right.
enemy comes in, what he does, he constantly keeps tension and division. We can never have a relationship. We can never love each other. We can never get to know each other, and the cycle continues.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm real passionate, and I love what we do at Grip. And I want you to share your experience and stuff like that. But I just love that it's a diverse team,
Yeah.
and that we all have our different backgrounds and upbringings, but man, when we're together, it's just like, man, I feel like I've been knowing you guys for like years. I only been around for like 6 months.
Right. Right.
And everybody's so different. Everybody has a different story, which is the reason why I wanted to catch that, like, and be able to share your story and talk about what you're passionate about and your life experiences. And I just think it's amazing. It feels good, right? It feels good to be part of community and to be able to share the differences. But I could rant all day. But yeah, share your experience. Or do you have anything else before we transition into Grip Slam that you want to share, that you want to talk about?
No,
Floor is yours.
no, it's been great. And I love talking about race, talking about culture. I'm constantly wanting to learn, and like hearing other people's experiences is a blessing for me because I know I don't know it all, and I need to
Yeah.
learn from others. And like you said, like build those relationships with people that look like you, that look different than you, because everyone's going to have a different experience. I think maybe the last thing that I'll say is kind of related to what you were talking about relationships is what's been really interesting for me to watch in the last handful of years on social media is like when it started, social media was kind of more of a conversation. Like you would post on someone's wall, they would post back, you would tweet something, someone will respond to it. Like it was kind of this dialogue, kind of, not fully, but kind of this dialogue. But then as social media grew, as different platforms started, as we turned to more of like Instagram, TikTok, like quick fix sort of things, and then conversations about race happened, it became more of a platform as a megaphone of like, I'm going to say my piece and you don't get a chance to say nothing because this is my platform. We're not going to have a dialogue about it.
And I turn your comments off.
Right? Exactly. Exactly. It's like you control the conversation, but if you control it, that's not a conversation. That's a megaphone. That's a monologue. And so it's been interesting watching how social media is becoming more and more of that look at me platform rather than a, hey, let me get to know you platform. And so relationships, I think now more than ever are huge, because unless you go deep with someone, unless you ask the questions, unless you really get to know someone, it's really easy to assume your way is right or your way is best. But to have someone challenge you in that and for you to learn, and maybe you still learn, yeah, like what I am doing is right or what I'm doing is good, but you have a bigger and better perspective on it. And you've invited
Mhm.
someone else into that, and someone else has invited you into that. And you learn more about who God is, because you learn about the gifts, the abilities, the talents that the Lord has given each of us, and they're different, they're diverse. And you mentioned it before, like we need each other, because in order for us to be at our best, we need each other. And each other is all across the board, different ethnicities, different races, different experiences.
Amen. Amen, bro. Amen. So your grip story. Let's
Yeah.
hear it, man. Why did you choose to work and serve at Grip?
Yeah. So my junior year in college, I took an adolescent psychology class, and one of the things that we had to do was go to an organization in the city that worked with adolescents and write about it. And so we were all paired to different organizations. In my group, there were four, maybe five of us. We were paired for the Boys and Girls Club. And at this point in my life, I felt like I wasn't sure if I was Black, because my experience wasn't very similar to a lot of what I was told the Black experience was. So we get to this get to this Boys and Girls Club, and I'm the only Black guy in the group. And we're shooting hoops with the kids. They're not quite adolescents. A lot of them are more grade school, at least in the first part of the night. And so we're shooting hoops with kids. We're just kind of chopping it up, getting to know them. And then the second half of the night, we get high schoolers that come in, and now we're downstairs in their area with couches, with foosball tables, with books, just hanging out, just trying to build relationships with students and kind of meet them where they're at, and in any way that we can to kind of be a help or an aid, or just someone that they can talk to. And I remember leaving that experience and thinking to myself, man, I don't ever want to do this again. I don't ever want to be around a bunch of Black kids, because I don't feel like that's my experience. And I don't know what happened, but that was junior in college. Probably 4 years later, I'm in California. And again, there wasn't like this moment where I remember anything happening, but I remember I had a desire to do ministry with youth, and it involved sports and music. And I was like, all right, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this looks like. This is probably 2012, 2013 at this point. I don't know what this is, but this is something I feel passionate about. And so I would talk to people about it in California for the next 2 years, mentioned I want to do something that involves sports, music, kids. They're like, cool, what is that? And I don't know. I don't know. So then, summer 2014, I moved to Chicago, and my roommate at the time, I didn't know him. I hadn't met him before that. And probably 2 weeks into living with him, he was like, so tell me a little bit about you, your story. What are you passionate about? And so I shared some of the stuff that I've already shared with you, and then mentioned, and I want to do ministry that involves sports, music, and kids. I don't know what that looks like. And he was like, oh, we got a few programs like that in the city. Actually, there's one called Grip. You should go check it out. So 2 weeks into moving to Chicago, I look at the Grip website, see what they're all about. I'm like, all right, I'll check it out. End up doing my mentor interview to become a mentor with Grip. And 6 weeks into moving to Chicago, I'm plugged in with Grip. I remember my first night was the last night of training. And so I'm coming in, like they had context for training, talking about, oh, we're going to start slam next week. I'm like, man, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like I feel like this is where I'm supposed to be, but man, what am I doing? And then that next week we started slam, and I remember just the look on my face as students are coming in, as I'm reminded of my time at the Boys and Girls Club, students that look the same as me, and me feeling that tension of like, man, but I can't connect with them. Like my story isn't their story. And realizing, man, I was limiting myself so much in that. And a lot of that was driven by fear. And how like, for 3 years, I was a mentor. For 2 years, I transitioned to one of our support teams. The support team doesn't walk as closely with students like Life on Life, but they're a big part of what makes the program happen. And so I was on that support team for 2 years, and then now been on staff for 3 years. And it's been really incredible seeing how the Lord has grown my understanding of what it means to be Black and the ways that I've been able to connect with students that look like me, that for a long time I was like, I'm not gonna be able to connect with them because I don't got their experience. So it's been such a God thing to see His faithfulness and Him bringing me to where I'm at now, where I'm leading a slam program that 8 years ago I was just about to step into for the first time.
He being humble, y'all. He ain't just leading a program. He has director in his title. This is the director of Slam for the central location, which is in the Cabrini Green neighborhood. So Cal be doing big things, and I just wish that I can just imitate a little bit of you and Will's energy and passion. Like I told y'all, listen, this is the quiet, silent assassin right here. When Cal gets up in the room and he starts to speak, everybody's like, what he say? Like everybody's at full attention. I'm telling you, like I witnessed this at our retreat and it blew my mind. I was like, we were eating. He just got up. He ain't say nothing to nobody. Walked into the middle of the cafeteria and just commanded everybody's attention. I was like, man, I want to be able to do that. I was trying to do that with my kids.
And we were talking about something real goofy at the table too. I don't even remember, but we were like,
Yeah,
laughing,
it was just, what's it called? It's called code switching.
like,
Sometimes
yeah.
Black folks, we do that with like in certain groups that we get in, we code switch. Like we go from talking like, yeah, you know what I'm saying, to be like, hey, how you doing, sir?
Right. Yeah.
We just code switch. It's just,
Yeah.
it's a survival mechanism. Like,
Yeah.
so we do. But yeah, man. So how's your experience been as Slam director?
Yeah. It's really interesting for me kind of seeing things from the volunteer side first and then stepping into the director role. I think there's a pro and a con to it. The pro is, I've seen the slam program for a while, even before I step in. So I kind of know what things look like. I know what to expect, at least to a certain extent. Obviously, stepping into a director role, way different than volunteer, but you at least know, for the most part, what a night's going to look like and what to expect. The
Yeah.
con from that, though, is you can get stuck in your old way of like how things have been. And if it's been good, great. But sometimes we get stuck in our own patterns and comfort because we don't want to do something else. And so I've been challenged even in my time as a director, thinking through like, how do I take a step back and truly evaluate Slam to make it the best that it can be, even if it's a little different than what it was when I was a volunteer. And so it's been an incredible experience. I honestly miss the level of connection that I had with students when I was a mentor. I feel like the relationships went deeper. I got to talk with them more. And I still try to make myself present with students on a Monday night, but man, it's different when you're a mentor, kind of walking life with them versus when you got that director title and they know like you are the authority. You can still build with them, still build a relationship, but it just looks different. But man, you mentioned our staff team. We got an incredible team, y'all. Like we really, really do. I love like working with the staff, different ideas, different thoughts that they bring to the table, and we're all passionate about what we do. And it's real cool to have those conversations where we walk away and we're like, man, we just had a really good conversation, and we're gonna make Slam even better than what it is now. And so I honestly love coming into work. I don't just say that, like I really mean that. There haven't been too many jobs that I felt that way about. And this is one of them that I am truly excited to be a part of. And sometimes it is hard. You walk away from a slam night, you're thinking about all the things that didn't go well while volunteers are celebrating, students are celebrating. They're like, man, this was a fun night. Whereas I'm thinking of like the 10 things that went wrong that are like minute details, but they're the things that I'm paid to look at and make sure that they go smoothly. So yeah, it is tough sometimes, like being my own worst critic. But honestly, at the end of the day, like I wouldn't trade what I do.
Yeah, that's so dope, man, and I'm super happy to be part of this team now. I said this in other videos. I thought I would miss trucking, but I don't miss it. I do not miss trucking, man. I'm still surprised that I do not miss trucking. Like I was driving next to a JB Hunt truck on the highway, and I was like, I'm like pre-tripping his truck for him as he's on the side of me. I'm like, okay, lights are working, tires. I'm like, okay, but I was like, man, do I miss being in that truck? And I was like, I do not miss being in that truck. So But it's been amazing, man. Just the experience. Why should people come to Slam, like students? Why should students come to Slam, and then why should people volunteer to be mentors or even in support roles?
Yeah, yeah. So I'll talk to the adults first. I think just from my own experience, I've learned that there's so much as a Black man that I can offer a student, even though I don't necessarily feel like my experience is always the same as theirs. Because at the end of the day, it's not me, like it's the Lord at work in our lives. And it was the Lord at work in my life, helping me break down my own fear of my own culture, my own race, and not feeling like I belong there. And God showing me that no, like there are so many people that He has made in His image, and that He has trusted me to walk alongside with. But even if you're not Black, even if you have a different ethnicity, I think it is an incredible experience to learn, like to be able to step in, to be able to give to students, to be able to pour into students, to invest 100%. But I bet you within the first couple of weeks, you're going to learn something from a student. Like there's going to be something that they're going to say that's going to challenge you spiritually, that'll make you really deepen your relationship with the Lord, or a question they're going to give you, or something they're going to tell you that really makes you think like, man, like, why am I doing what I'm doing? Or
definitely gonna make you definitely gonna have to pray after you talk to some of these kids. I'm telling you.
Like it's one of those things where it's like it honestly works both ways. You're investing in the students, but you're also learning from students, and that's been one thing that's been really cool for me to see. So that would be my encouragement, my challenge to adults is like step into this, because the Lord can and will use you. I promise. Like if you're willing to be used by Him, He's going to use you in this way, and it's going to be a great thing for you to learn from, and a great way for you to be able to step into the life of a youth. And then for students, what I would say is, man, yes, I think the program is fun. Like we play games, we got different activities going on. Like we want this to be a space where you come and like you have a good time. But my push would be, man, we got people here who really want to see you succeed. Like they want you to reach the best and the highest potential that you have, not just from like an academic perspective, a sports perspective, an emotional perspective, but also from a spiritual perspective. Like we want the best things for you. And so we want to create that space where you have the opportunity to succeed. You have the opportunity to step into something in high school, beyond high school, that can really stretch you and grow you into the man, into the woman that God wants you to be. And so Slam is a great place to be able to be poured into, to be loved on, to have fun, to kick it, to chill, to meet people, and honestly, to help you become the best version of yourself that you can be. And so that would be my challenge, my encouragement to students is you're going to change as you come to Slam. And I promise you, it's going to be a great change. It's going to be a really good change.
Don't come in that sad, because when you going to leave with a big smile on your face.
Right.
As soon as you walk through them doors, that smile, that frown going to turn into a smile, straight up. Well, man, Kyle, I appreciate you taking some time to talk to your boy. We've been planning this for a hot little minute, man, and I just appreciate your time. I appreciate your perspective. Appreciate you opening up and being transparent and sharing your story. And just, man, and the great things that God is doing in your life, man, and doing through you and for you at the same time. So appreciate you, man, and I'm gonna let you get on up out of here so you can get to the crib, because I think you're still in the office. So go home.
Thanks for letting me up. It's been really cool. I appreciate you just letting me chop it up with you, to learn more about who you are, for me to share my experience. Man, this has been a joy. So appreciate you bringing me on, man.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll check you later, man. To the next one, bro. I'll holler at you, man.
All right.
Peace.